Warning, some viewers may find this content disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. What is the creepiest thing that has ever happened to you? When I was in my early 20s, I was fresh out of the closet and lived in the French Quarter. I started getting hang-up calls from someone, presumably a hookup. After a few months of sporadic calls, someone showed up outside of my window at around 2 a.m. and started blasting a tape recording of me saying, "Hello? Hello?" Then drove off. 10 years old. Men's locker room at the Y. An old dude touched my dick and smiled. It was over in 1 second and haunts me 42 years later. Walking home from 7 to 11 in San Diego, guy parks across street and starts walking behind me asking me incoherent questions. I apologize, I'm new here, keep walking. Guy slaps beer out of my hands, puts one arm under my right armpit, uses the right boob as a kind of handle and the other between my legs and gropes the lady zone and starts dragging me into bushes. I'm awkward and shocked, so I start forcefully scolding him, "Sir, no, sir, no." Not loudly enough until I realize he's successfully kidnapping me and likely for nefarious purposes. I yell louder, "No." Thankfully an off-duty cop was jogging and came running at the guy who dropped me, grabbed my purse, ran, then dropped it and kept running. They found him a few months later. I testified and he went to federal prison. I think he's out as of last year. A few years back, I woke up in the middle of the night. We had a 2-month newborn sleeping in the room next door. I had a video monitor on my bedside table, so that my wife and I could easily check on him. So, I clicked the button that turns on the video image, and what I saw scared me like nothing ever before. My baby boy was gone. Now, I know that instincts should have made me run right into the baby's room. Instead, I froze. I looked over, and my wife was sleeping next to me. Finally, I moved. But not to run into the other room, like I should have done. Instead, I turned up the volume on the baby monitor. I heard another woman's voice singing a lullaby. I'm not kidding. Another woman was singing to my baby in a very soft, gentle and melodic voice. I don't remember what song it was, something like "Go to sleep, little baby." Finally, my freeze broke. I jumped up, ran through the hallway and burst into my boy's room. He was sound asleep in his crib. No woman. No singing. Turns out, the monitor was picking up my next-door neighbor's monitor. They had just bought the video monitor for their own newborn, on our recommendation. Nothing supernatural here, but I don't know if I've ever experienced something scarier. When I was 11, my mother and I lived with her boyfriend who I hated. He was occasionally physically abusive to me and was always intimidating. Anyway, when it got super creepy was one rainy Saturday morning. My mom was at work, so it was just me and Rick home. The phone rang at about 8 a.m. and I jumped out of bed and went to the kitchen to answer it. It was my little league coach calling to confirm that my baseball game had been rained out. I headed back toward my bedroom but had to pass Rick's bedroom to get there. As I did, there he stood, 6'2" and buck naked. Not wanting to chat with any grown naked man, I averted my gaze and tried to shoot into my bedroom. As I tried to shut the door, I felt something block it open. Rick had followed me to my room and stuck his foot out to keep me from shutting the door. He stood right by me, towering over me, and asked what the call was. I told him, but he just stood there, 2 feet away, naked and glaring at me for what was probably 30 seconds but felt more like 5 minutes. He said nothing but stared angrily at me. I was already terrified of him from some violence he had committed against me before, but this was different. This felt like a strange, sexual intimidation. Very scary for a young boy. Very creepy. He finally turned around and walked away. Nothing like that ever happened again, but I did later learn he had some strange sexual issues. I was left with the feeling that he was sizing me up on a very creepy and unhealthy way. It has stuck with me almost 35 years now. A person was shot in the head 3 feet away from me in the spot I was standing not 5 seconds before in queue. I was skiing with a group of my friends, and I let a family take my spot in line because it would have fit the lift exactly at 10 people. We quickly swapped spots and I turned around to my friends, putting my back to the father who now stood in my spot. Then he just dropped. No loud bang or anything, just a thud as the guy hit the snow with blood splattering all over my back. I see his face every day. We found out later that there was a group of people hunting where they shouldn't have been, and that it must have been a stray bullet. Someone attempted to kidnap my friend in front of me. I was about 8, and walking home from the school bus stop in a scattered group with various neighborhood kids and parents. I was walking with my mom, and my friend had fallen a few feet behind us. This beat to shit brown car pulled up and stopped by my friend. I turned around just in time to see her shake her head no and run toward my mom and me. The driver was a former employee her parents had just fired. He saw her walking, pulled up, and yelled, "Get in." He did all of this with multiple witnesses. I don't know what his long-term plan was, but at the least he wanted to frighten her parents for firing him. Fucking creep. When I was in 3rd grade, I remember getting called to the front office to be dismissed. I always knew when I would be getting dismissed beforehand, so this caught me off guard. Maybe my mom was going to surprise me with a day off? Maybe? Anyway, I get about halfway to the office and my teacher comes up behind me screaming at the top of her lungs to get back in the classroom now. And grabbed my arm super hard, which I understand now as an adult, and dragged me back into the classroom. I thought I was in trouble. She immediately slammed the door shut behind me and locked it, then flipped the lights off. I'm so very confused. The classroom phone was lying on her desk instead of being hung up on the wall. She whispers into the phone that I'm officially back in the room and in lockdown. Then an announcement over the school's intercom informs the entire school that they need to be in lockdown and that all students need to run back to the classrooms. Cue silent panic. Long story short, some random guy tried to dismiss me from school to kidnap me. We don't know who he was or anything about him. My mother was immediately called to dismiss me after being phoned about the incident. She had to show her license and walk all the way to the classroom to physically walk with me. 3 days after this event, happened on a Friday, we had full photo name tags for any non-student, aka an adult, who wanted to walk through the office doors. You had to give your license hash, scan a copy of your license, take a current pic to be printed on a temp badge, then be cleared to enter the actual building by scanning the photo ID temp badge. Makes me sick to think about. I now have a 3-year-old daughter who I am slightly nervous about sending to school in a few years. Fortunately, school security is way more amped up than when I was in school back in the 90s. When my kid was about 2.5 years old, he was a champion sleeper. Put him to bed, he was out pretty quick and would sleep through the night until morning. One weeknight, he wakes up around 11 p.m. crying about his grandmother, his dad's mom, saying he wants to call her. I tell him we can't call her because she's sleeping, just like he should be. It took a while and I had to let him stay in my bed, but I got him back to sleep by promising we would call her at 7 a.m. when we wake up for school. My alarm goes off at 7 a.m., he immediately gets up and asks to call Grandma. We do. Aunt answers the phone. Apparently, Grandma was in a work-related accident at about 11 p.m. the night before, and had only just gotten home from the hospital about an hour before, so she was sleeping. Easily the creepiest moment of my life. My kid and his grandma have some seriously deep connection I'm unable to explain. I used to have a shit job at a casino that got me working some pretty weird hours. Some days I would work a normal 9 to 5, others I would go in at 6 p.m. and not leave until 2 or 3 a.m. Not a big deal, except by that time in the morning, all the parking spaces around my apartment building would be taken, so I had to park a few blocks away and walk to get to my building. I would park, get my pepper spray and keys in hand, lock my car, and walk the block or two to my building. I never felt like was in any way unsafe until one night when I found a parking space across the street from my building that happened to be in front of a bar. I pulled into the space and got my keys ready. I noticed a guy smoking in the doorway of the bar, about 5 cars down, but he was looking in the other direction and didn't seem to care that I was there. I got out of the car and was about halfway across the street before he noticed I was a girl and I heard him yell, "Hi sweetie." I ignored him, and that must have pissed him off, because he yelled, "Bitch." I started sprinting to my building when I heard the sound of him running up behind me. The building I lived in at the time had been built a long time ago, and everything was outdated, including the security system. After 10 p.m. the doors would lock automatically, and you would have to put a key in the lock and turn it for the doors to open, and it would take forever. I finally got the door opened and it just shut it before he got there and was yanking on the handle and screaming at me. My skin was crawling for a few days after that. Didn't happen to me, but a few stories from where I work. I work in a medium-sized city hotel. For some reason we seem to attract the weirdos. First story happened to the late duty manager as she was doing her nightly walk around before handing over to the night porter, about 2,300. As she's walking around checking all the doors that should be closed/locked are, she finds the door to one of the function rooms is unlocked. She walks into the room, the lights are off and as it's dark out she flicks on the light to check the area. Stood in the middle of the room, in the pitch dark, is an older woman, slightly disheveled and crazy hair, think bag lady, just staring at her. Now this woman has obviously come into the hotel much earlier in the day, or she would have been noticed as she walked past reception and down the hall to the function room. Turned out she'd been stood in there in the dark for a good few hours. DM tells her to leave, she just stares daggers at her and walks out without saying a word. The second story happened to the night porter at the same hotel. Following a report that something had gone missing from the staff room one night, we reviewed the CCTV tapes the next day. It turned out that some bloke had managed to get in through an unsecured delivery entrance downstairs and nick some belongings from the staff room one night. The creepy thing is, having done this, instead of leaving the way he came, he went upstairs, through the kitchen and into the bar. Now the bar is separated from reception, where the NP spends most of his shift, by a curtain. The intruder then proceeds to spend a good 4 hours just peering through a gap in the curtain at the porter. When the night porter comes into the bar area to set up for breakfast, this bloke just ducks behind the bar and continues to stare at him. Eventually, as the sun comes up and the NP goes to the toilet, or wherever, the guy just walks out the front door. Even just watching the tapes creeped me out. You could see the NP felt uncomfortable just by the way he looked around all night. After we showed him the tapes, he said he had felt uneasy that night, but didn't know why. We never caught the creepy thief. The creepy lady, however, does make an appearance every now and again, generally trying some odd stuff, but most of the time we catch her before she manages to scare anyone else half to death. My creepy thing happened about a month or two after I moved to Lima. I was taking a taxi home from a friend's house around midnight. Now, independent taxis are unregulated there. Anyone can slap a taxi sign on their roof, or tape it to the inside of their windshield, as the case may be, and presto, they're a taxi. My friend lives in a pretty sketchy neighborhood, and I, having long blonde hair, am obviously a foreigner. I get in a taxi that has checkers on the side, which is usually decently safe, and give my driver directions to my house. About 2/3 of the way there, he asks me to clarify where my house is. I do, then he abruptly turns the car at a 90-degree angle and parks it in the middle of the road, turns off the engine, and gets out. I asked him what's going on. I think he says something about the engine needing to cool, but I'm not quite fluent at that point, so I'm still not 100% sure what he said. He opens the hood of the car, takes out his phone, and starts texting someone. I had a general idea of where we were, but I wasn't sure, and I really didn't like the idea of taking off down an empty street at night on my own, so I stayed with the car as well. After maybe 30 seconds, he shuts the hood of his car, puts away his phone, and I get back in because I am an idiot. We continue to my house, which is where it got weirder. It's common in Lima to just tell the taxi driver which block of the street you want to get out at, because again, any rando can be a taxi driver. Not this guy, though. He kept asking me for my exact address, even when I told him it's literally the house on the corner. I gave up arguing and told him the number of a big building a block away from my house, paid him, and pretended to walk up to that building until he had, slowly, driven away. Don't know if anything would have happened later if I'd given him my house number, but it creeped me out enough that I got my friend to pick taxis for me for the next few months. I was seeing a girl occasionally, friends with benefits set up. About 2 months into our fling, I have a ridiculously vivid dream of the girl having a C-section and giving birth to my son. I can remember holding my son, the feel of his warm, smooth, fragile skin, in this dream. I remember dreaming about looking into his milky blue eyes, smelling his milky breath as I bent down to kiss him. This dream was powerful, realistic. I told her about it. She laughed. She has an IUD in, she tells me, and cannot get pregnant. Phew. Just a silly, albeit realistic, dream. We have a good laugh at my expense. Fast forward 3 months, she's gained some weight and is having strange bouts of nausea. So goes to the doctor. She was pregnant, with an IUD, and the use of condoms 99.8% of the time, at the time of my dream. The doctor says at one point, "Too bad you didn't play the lottery that day. 99% isn't 100%. They removed the IUD. 4 months later, she has a baby boy. In the delivery room she jokes, "At least we don't need a C-section." 16 hours of labor later, emergency C-section. He turns 1 on April 5th, just a few days from now. Pretty awesome, but still creepy. When I was 13, I used to sneak out of my house and walk around the forest near home as a means of rebelling against my parents, who thought our neighborhood was really dangerous, which it wasn't. I got to the edge of the forest at probably 1,230 to 1 and I immediately noticed a really tall lanky man walking around the perimeter, but I know it would have been impossible for him to see me from where I was. Anyway, I watched him walk off till I couldn't see him anymore and made for the forest path, which is lit up by really dim orange overhead lights. Started walking and singing bubblegum in a dish when I saw the same dude from before like 30 feet away standing under the light. Total movie shit, couldn't see his face really or anything. We both just stood there for a second and he said in a super calm voice, "I never asked for much." I turned around and started to run and looked back and he was stepping into the trees. True story, cliches and all. Probably getting chased by two guys. My friend and I were walking home together from a party and I was extremely under the influence while she was my sober mama. The main street we normally used was blocked due to an accident, so we walked down a random dark residential street. Two guys walking in the opposite direction walked right past us. A few steps later I get the most intense gut feeling and my friend and I at the same time turn to look at each other, and then behind us, we see those two guys sprinting now in our direction. Never have I bolted that fast while being drunk in my entire life. We get to the end of the street and there were lights and a cop car. We looked and the guys had slowed and stopped. We also immediately ran into two old friends from high school. Guardian angels, man, thank God. When I was 11, I was at the beach. I realized a sketchy guy was sort of following me around. Everywhere I went, he was about 20 feet away just kind of glaring at me. He was probably in his mid-30s, your average, bearded creeper from the early 90s. I realized something was wrong when I got separated from the friend I was with and jumped into a little tide pool that had a rip effect going. The guy jumped in on the other end and I was getting dragged toward him. I can still remember the dude's slow, deliberate frog stroke as he got closer and closer. I had a huge surge of adrenaline and managed to claw my way out of the water. I took off running, screaming for my friend. It was a pretty busy day at the beach, and I imagine a grown man sprinting after a kid would have raised eyebrows. I stuck like glue to my parents until we left. That guy probably would have made furniture out of my skin. This happened in the mid-60s. We lived on a dead-end gravel road without any street lights. It must have been summer because the front door was wide open with only the screen door closed. It was after dark and the whole family was in the living room watching TV. The whole family included both of my parents and my two other siblings. My attention was taken away from the TV show to the sound of a car slowing coming down the road and a woman inside screaming the most blood-curdling scream I have ever heard, before or since. I'm sure none of us decided to get up and look out the door. We were just there and looking in no time flat. The car had turned around and was parked facing down the road the way it had come in, no lights on inside or out. It was an older model car that looked very much like this one, except it was painted black or another dark color. The screaming just went on and on. My heart was pounding and I couldn't catch my breath. Finally my mother moved first and turned on the porch light. A long moment later the car started to slowly drive off on down the road. She continued to scream as the car drove out of sight. At this point, my mother shut off the front porch light, and everyone just went back to their places and sat down. No one said anything. No one did anything. I couldn't believe my parents weren't going to do anything. No one ever spoke of it again. That's the creepiest thing about that night. Not the spooky car with the screaming woman, but my zombie parents with no reaction to a nightmare in their front drive. Cody, Wyoming, midnight. I had just finished a very long day at work. I am a medical courier, and I am regularly on the road, staying in hotels, and life is never dull. This particular evening I wound up on a 500 miles drive that ended in Cody, Wyoming, at around midnight. It had been cold, it was December after all, and this is Wyoming. The roads had been very so-so that night. They weren't clear, but they weren't treacherous. It was one of those drives in the dark where you were on edge the whole time. Staying alert for 500 miles in the dark, on roads that were nearly abandoned at this time of night, with light snow and heavy winds, it takes a lot out of a person. This particular week it had been very busy. I had been in 4 states that week by the time I reached Wyoming that evening. The drive to the patient's house was up a windy slick road, and the drive was uneventful. After I had dropped the medicine off to them and called the boss to let them know I had made it in and was heading to a hotel to get some sleep. Pretty usual conversation. We talked briefly about how much they would reimburse me for the hotel room. They always say $80, $100. It's pretty typical, and fair, since the cheap hotel in Cody, Wyoming is about that price. I however am 31 and a good night's rest, a good free breakfast, and a nice AM soak in a hot tub are requirements for when I catch myself in a hotel room. I know that by the time I get to the hotel I have put on serious miles, so I treat myself. 1. Because if I am staying in a hotel it has been a profitable day and I can afford to treat myself just a little. And 2, I feel better after a good night's rest, a great breakfast, and a nice soak. I will not name the chain of hotels I stay at, but I frequent one chain because it's the best value hotel in my hometown, which is back in Nebraska. Tonight I pulled into the hotel, which I have stayed at 3 or 4 times now, so I am familiar with the place. I had called ahead about 8 hours before when I was leaving Denver to call and book a room, and let them know they would be expecting me at midnight. I walk into the hotel with my bag, dusting off the snow that had fallen on me while I got my stuff out of the car and walked inside. It's very quiet, there's no music and the TV isn't on in the lobby. I wander to the counter, leaving a trail of wet shoe prints behind from coming in out of the snow into the lobby, my shoes squeaking as I approach the counter. When I get to the counter there is no one at there. On the counter is a bowl of ice cream, with a brownie from the restaurant connected to the hotel, the local paper is open to the comics page, and the Sudoku is half filled out with a pen sitting there. Hanging on the back of the chair is a small lady's coat with fake fur fringe around the hood. On the floor next to the chair are a pair on smaller pink and black Nikes, and a black purse. I figure that she, by the assumption of the coat, shoes and purse, is in the bathroom, so I stand at the counter quietly, waiting on her to return. I fiddle with my wallet getting out my card to pay for it and my ID. I scroll through on my phone and hook to the free Wi-Fi. 5 minuets go by. Then 10. At 15 minuets the phone starts ringing. I still had no idea where she was, and I had begun to get irritated. It had been a long day and I wanted to get rested before I got up and drove home in the morning. After the phone stopped ringing, and I started to get frustrated, I began to wander around the lobby, and behind the counter shouting "Hello, is anyone here?" as loudly as possible. The area behind the counter is an employee-only area. I venture back behind the counter where a hallway leads to the back of house area connected to the offices, staff elevator, bathrooms, laundry and the restaurant. I venture down the hallway shouting "Hello," still no one answers. It is now 12:30 am. As I return to the counter and begin looking for a posted phone number for a manager, or someone of authority, the phone rings, the cordless phone still laying next to the paper she had opened. Frustrated and exhausted I answer the phone, hoping it's someone who could tell me where the woman is who is supposed to check me in. It's not. It's another guest, who had tried calling earlier for a wake-up call in the morning. I explained to the gentleman on the phone my situation, and how I cannot help him. He states he is coming to the lobby to help me look for the girl at the counter. I had not found a number to call. 5 minuets go by and the strange older man, with odd glasses and long unkempt hair comes into the lobby from the first floor hallway. At this point I had been behind the counter, and had been shouting to the point I feared I may wake up other guests. I had wandered through the back area, the lobby and the front part of the restaurant, all while shouting, and no one responded. This guy had given me the creeps, and I was exhausted but on high alert. There was an employee missing, and a creepy guy who just happened to appear in the same time she is missing. Feeling nervous about this gentleman I stay prepared for any strange behavior and keep myself at least arm's distance from him the entire time. I explain where I have looked. That I have yelled. At this point I begin to go through what I call worst-case scenario preparation. This guy could have easily overpowered a small woman. I may be standing here with a crazy person. I keep my space, and my back towards the main entry just in case. I am a grown man, just under 6 feet, I have had self-defense courses, and I have a CCW, concealed carry weapon, after encountering a bear at a patient's house in the fall. I have no reason to believe I am in immediate trouble but this guy just gives me the creeps. It is at this point I debate calling the cops. It's now 12:45 am. The gentleman tells me, maybe she's in the bathroom, which I respond to that I had thought that myself, but I had walked by and yelled loudly when I walked through the back and no one responded. He insists we check the bathrooms. My red flag goes off and I put another foot or two of space between us as I let him lead us down the hallway to the employee bathroom. My heart and mind are racing at this point. Did this dude kill her and now he's gonna try to kill me? I start to worry about my safety as we go down a hallway that leads to small rooms and with one exit in and out. We reach the bathroom. He knocks and announces himself, then opens the door. The bathroom is empty. We check a few more rooms and the elevator and find nothing. We venture back to the lobby where I stand behind the counter looking for any phone number that could be a manager or supervisor. After about 10 minutes I find a number and someone answers. It's now 12:55 am. The half-asleep voice on the other end of the phone is the maintenance woman for the hotel. Confused as to who I am and why I'm calling, I explain the situation as the creepy man stands on the other side of the counter staring at me in a dead cold manner. The maintenance woman says she will be there in 10 minuets or so. I hang up the phone. I walk around the counter still confused looking at her stuff there, as if she just vanished. It's at this point I decide to wander towards the lobby/seating for the restaurant. Once in the doorway I turn the corner and down at the end of the booths there are a pair of legs hanging out of the booth. I had walked within 15 feet of there while checking around before the creepy guy showed up. I see her legs hanging and instantly the pit of my stomach turns sour and a sense of dread comes over me. Suddenly the creepy guy walks right up by me. Thinking the worst I take a few quick steps away from him and down the row of booths in the dark restaurant. With him at the other end, I look in the booth where she is laying. She is maybe 20 and very pretty. I shake her foot, she doesn't respond. I shake again, saying hey. Nothing. It's at this moment the creepy guy starts down the booth that I finally feel I may need to defend myself. I kneel down to draw from my ankle holster as he quickly comes down the row of booths, and it's at this exact moment the girl wakes up and accidentally kicks me in the chest, knocking me gently on my ass and stopping Mr. Creepy in his tracks, also stopping me from drawing a weapon. She had been asleep. Mr. Creepy was just a guest. Moments later the maintenance woman arrived and by 1:15 am I was in my room trying to decompress. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more daily videos, and join the spooky squad.